All right, it's finally here, Daytona 500 week, so it's time for the season preview. Coming up next. What's going on, everybody? If I haven't earned your subscription, hopefully today is the day I will earn that subscription. All right, let's get into the season preview. I've decided to break it down by manufacturer, and I'm going to start with statistically who had the worst season as a manufacturer. So we're going to start off with Ford with only 7 wins on the season. Ford was a little bit off. Of course, last year they had an amazing season with Kevin Harvick, or the year previous they had an amazing season with Kevin Harvick, racking up those 9 or 10 wins that he had that season before. But this season, only 7 wins altogether as a manufacturer, and most of those wins coming from Penske. Of course, Michael McDowell and Aric Almirola had a win apiece, but the rest of Ford's wins came from Penske. So although it was a down year for Ford, it was not a down year for Penske. Of course, Penske got all 3 of its cars into the playoffs and almost got that satellite Wood Brothers car into the playoffs. So it wasn't all bad, but let's break it down team by team for Ford. The season for Ford actually started off pretty good. Michael McDowell won for FrontRow Motorsports, and FrontRow Motorsports overall has done what they've continued to do throughout its life cycle. They show a little bit of improvement each season. They don't make these huge leaps in improvement, but they make a little bit of improvement year after year, and they are now starting to compete for the 15th to 10th position on the racetrack, whereas when they first started out, obviously they were not a very competitive team. So they've improved each year as time goes on. But of course, last year, a down year for Ford. But Front Row actually ran well. Like I said, Michael McDowell got into the playoffs, and he made a pretty good showing for himself all the way up till about halfway into the season. Then it just sort of fell apart for the guy. Don't know exactly what happened, but they did show more improvement this season than they did last season. So Front Row Motorsports will look to gain a little bit more, but it will be a challenge. They did lose crew chief Drew Blickensderfer, so they will have to find some team chemistry and get someone to gel with Michael McDowell. But with the new car, everything's fair game. So if they can continue to make improvements, which I think they will probably be a little bit better this season, just like they do every other year. They just improve a little bit. So I look for them to improve a little bit this season. All right, now let's talk about Stewart HAAS and Rick Ware Racing. I'm going to lump these two together because Rick Ware Racing is now a satellite team of Stewart HAAS Racing, and last year was absolutely abysmal for 3/4 of the season for Stewart HAAS Racing. The last few races, though, it looked like they found a little speed and they were a lot more competitive. Of course, none of that matters because we got a new car now. And I look for Stewart HAAS to rebound, and I think they're going to have a great season coming up. And I look for Kevin Harvick to get a few wins. I look for, Aric Almirola not to be the only guy winning from the Stewart HAAS stable. But more importantly, Rick Ware Racing, which for most of its existence has been a laughingstock for some fans. Rick Ware Racing now has speed. Cody Ware was up there mixing it up with the big boys at the Clash. I know it's a small sample size. I know it's a small track. But this is the first time we've ever seen what Cody Ware has, because he hasn't been able to show anything with the cars that he's had. And even more importantly, the signing of Ryan Preece to run a few races for Rick Ware Racing is going to elevate that team to a whole nother level. Not to mention they've got David Reagan in there for super speedways. So I think Rick Ware Racing has made the most of switching over to this new body. They've linked up with Stewart HAAS, who I think will be on the rebound. I think they will have a much better season than they had last year. And I look for Rick Ware Racing to make a huge leap in performance from where they have been running previously. Now on to RFK. RFK had a bad season last season. Ryan Newman and Chris Buescher just did not have any speed. I think they made the most of what they had. But they are now Roush Fenway Keselowski, RFK. So we look for them to be a lot better. They have hired a lot of new people, a lot of people from Chip Ganassi. I look for this team to get off to a slow start, but they now have a winning driver, a championship caliber driver in Brad Keselowski. He's going to know what to tell these people to make his cars better, to improve the overall performance. He's been at Penske for a long time. He knows the Penske way of doing things, so he can bring some of that Penske way of doing things and merge it with the Roush way of doing things. And I think this team will look up, but I will look for them to be off to a slow start until about midway through the season. And then actually the season after that, or even the third season, would be where I look for Roush Fenway Keselowski to show some promise. But I don't think this season, I think they'll finish the season stronger than they finished last season, but I don't think this season is going to be much different for Roush Fenway Keselowski, and I hate saying that because I like BK, I like Roush Fenway, but I don't see them having much more improvement this season than they did last year, but I think eventually they will get there because they're on the right path. They've hired a lot of good people. All right, and finally, the Wood Brothers and Penske. They had a great season last season, and as crazy as this sounds, Joey Logano only won one race. Brad Keselowski, who will be replaced by Austin Cindric, only won one race. But Ryan Blaney won 3 races. And, I mean, they had a great season last year and were hardly talked about because the last 8 of the playoffs, they didn't run as good as they had been running the entire season. But this season, I look for that to change, and I look for Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano to lead the way. I think because of their experience with Australian V8 supercars, which are very similar to this new NASCAR next-gen car, which I'm just going to start calling the NASCAR supercar, I think they have a huge advantage, and I think you saw some of it in the clash at the Coliseum. I think you're going to see a lot of it, at least in the first half of the season, if not the entire season. I think because of their familiarity with this type of car and this type of racing, I think they are the odds-on favorite to not only win the championship, but they are going to elevate Ford to a whole nother level. This will not be another 7-win season for Ford. Ford is going to get at least 10, 12, 15, 20 wins this season. So I look for Ford to be the absolute favorite starting out with this new season and this new car. All right, now on to Toyota. Toyota's pretty easy. It's only 2 teams, really. And, you know, they've got 2311 and they've got Joe Gibbs Racing. Joe Gibbs Racing had 9 wins, and 2311 in its first year as a startup got 1 win, so good for them. But I think it was actually kind of a down year for Toyota because they got beat by 97 points in the manufacturer's battle. I think it was a sneaky down year for Toyota, actually. Martin Truex had 4 wins, second most, tied for second most with Alex Bowman, but tied for second most of any other driver, and his season was so up and down, he never was really, there were moments where he looked like he was a contender, but he was never really a contender for that championship. Denny Hamlin, he was consistently good, but he didn't pile up as many wins as Kyle Larson, and ultimately that is what sort of cost him the title, I think. So they had, where Toyota had some moments, they're sort of crippled by the fact that they only have really 4 cars, and then last year they had the 5th car of Bubba Wallace in the 23, but the 2311 guys struggled so hard, which is not a surprise because a first-year team, you don't expect them to come out of the gates and just absolutely contend for a championship. Rarely, if ever, does that happen. So next year, if you look at their numbers, extrapolate their numbers for next year, what do I think Toyota will do? Well, let's look at the good things they did. They brought back all of their guys. Kyle Busch, with a new crew chief last year, still got a couple of wins, and he carried that team on his back. So his second year with this crew chief, you think they have a little bit better chemistry. They'll be much better. Martin Truex is going to do what Martin Truex does. Expect him to be consistent. I think last year's inconsistency was an aberration. Christopher Bell, if he can add some consistency, he got the 1 win last year, but the rest of his season was just up and down, up and down. If he can add some consistency and maybe some more wins, he could be up there competing. And Bubba Wallace is now teaming up with Kurt Busch. The acquisition of Kurt Busch is the biggest move, in my opinion, of the offseason for Toyota because they add another champion to their mix, and I think Kurt Busch still has a lot to give. And if Bubba Wallace will work with him and listen to him, I think he can elevate Bubba Wallace's talent up to another level. But let's look at some of the bad things for Toyota. Let's start with 2311. And I'm going to start with Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace has been inconsistent throughout his entire career. And what concerns me about that is there are now 6 road courses. He has never shown any ability on a road course to run well. And you would think after a while you would look at it as a professional race car driver and say, hey, maybe I should start working on these road courses. So that's one area I would like to see 2311 improve on. They need to get Bubba Wallace some seat time in some road courses, and they need to build him up. For the rest of why I'm sort of down on Toyota, I think Toyota is going to have a tough year. It's because Chevrolet, through their Holden brand, and now it's actually just Chevrolet, they're going to run the Camaro over there, and Ford, they have plenty of experience with this type of race car in the V8 Supercar series. Toyota does not have experience in that. So as good as Toyota's driver lineup is, I think Toyota is actually going to struggle for at least the first half of the season until they get their head around this new car. And actually, historically, Toyota has not shown that when you bring something new into the sport, they adapt to it very well. In fact, it is my opinion, and it's just that, my opinion, that Toyota is most likely the person who whined and complained and got the Ford front end changed right before the Daytona 500. They put the most money into the sport right now, so if I had to guess, I'm guessing that they're the ones that got a little nervous during that clash at the Coliseum, that what they saw what Ford was doing, and they've already sent their lawyers to penalize Ford before the season even starts. Like, once again, this is just my opinion, but I think it's actually going to be a bad year for Toyota. That's my prediction. And finally, on to the big no-brainer. You can't have a much better season than Chevrolet had last year. They had 19 wins. They won the Manufacturers' Championship by 97 points, almost 100 points over the next closest competitor. And they won the Drivers' Championship, obviously, with Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson's 10 wins, over half of that 19-win season for Chevrolet, so they've got a good driver. But if you dig deeper into the numbers, you can't say it was a great year for Chevrolet without saying it was an absolutely great year for Rick Hendrick, because of those 19 wins, 16 or 17 of them came from Hendrick. 17 of them actually came from Hendrick. So it was a good year for Chevrolet, but much like Toyota, all of their eggs seem to be in one basket with Hendrick. So as goes Hendrick, so goes Chevrolet. So looking forward, it's going to be basically, has Hendrick Motorsports figured out this new car, or have they not? And that's going to be what it looks like going into the season, except for the fact, if you look at the other teams, RCR, TrackHouse, Ganassi, which is now TrackHouse, Petty GMS, well, not necessarily Petty GMS this time, but we'll get to them in a minute. RCR had chances to win races, but they were beat by other Chevrolet teams. So even though these numbers look skewed in the direction of Hendrick, if Hendrick hadn't been there, RCR, which they did actually win a race with one of their motors, and it's almost a house car for them, Kaulig Racing, they won that A.J. Allmendinger road course race. So the other Chevrolet teams did show strength. They just couldn't outrun, most of the time, the Rick Hendrick cars. But like I said, let's just go down the list. RCR, I think they had pretty much the same season as they had the year before. They have showed a lot of improvement. They are back in the ballgame now. They are competing for wins. They didn't get a win this season like they did last year, but they were right there knocking at the door. They were right there trying to get wins. So I think even though they didn't get a win, their improvement showed a whole lot. And if it hadn't been for so many multiple winners, Austin Dillon would have easily been in the playoffs pointing his way in. But obviously we had a few surprise winners, so that knocked Austin Dillon out. But he was the best of the guys who did not enter the playoffs. So RCR had a good season. Kaulig, even though they only ran half of a season, or a partial schedule, I should say, they won a race. So I expect Kaulig to come out the gate and be very, very competitive. TrackHouse as a startup team, I think they were up and down, but I think you expect that from a startup team. So I expect TrackHouse to improve on what they did last season. And the addition of Ross Chastain with Daniel Suarez, I think they've got two young drivers who are very capable. Suarez has won the Xfinity Championship, and Ross Chastain has won in everything he's been in except Cup. So I look for both of those drivers to improve on their talents and skills and be much better next season. I was really impressed with Ross Chastain on a road course. That is something he is notoriously not good at. He improved himself. Like, basically the opposite of what I said about Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace has not improved on his road course abilities. Well, Ross Chastain apparently has put in the time, and he got good at road courses. All right, now let's take a look at Spire. Spire has made no secret about they've been a field filler. They've waited for the new car, and now is when they're going to do something. So I expect Corey LaJoie to have marked improvement for two reasons. They've been getting Hendrick equipment. I think the Hendrick equipment they get now is going to be much better because they're going to spend more money. And B, there is no longer Ganassi Racing, so I don't think TrackHouse is going to get anything from Hendrick. I think they are still aligned with RCR. So I think that the Hendrick stuff coming into Spire Motorsports now will be a much tighter alliance with Hendrick than it has been in the past. And I look for Corey LaJoie to contend for a lot more wins and top tens than he did pretty much all of last year except for one or two races. So I'll actually look for this team to have a huge jump in performance, much like Rick Ware Racing. And finally, on to Petty GMS. Richard Petty Motorsports did pretty much what it normally does. It had a few high spots, but most of the time they were running for 20th to 15th to 25th. But it is because they were an underfunded team last year. With the merger of Petty GMS Racing now, the infusion of money, they have a full-time sponsor before the season even started. This is the first time that's happened since they had Smithfield Foods with Eric Almirola. Probably 2017 was the last time they started off the season where they knew they had a full-time sponsor to begin the season with. And also the addition of the 42 team. That's more information. I like multiple cars because just running a single car deal is always hard. And I think the Petty team is looking up. Now, I don't expect for them to compete for the championship, but I do think that they are now a team that can sneak their way in maybe as the 16th team. So I look for a marked improvement in Richard Petty Motorsports, but I don't think that they will necessarily compete for wins every week, but I do think that they can start sneaking up and competing for some wins, especially with this new car. And finally, JTG Daugherty. They have downsized to a one-car team. I just said I think that a one-car team is actually harder to run than a two-car team. But this season alone, I think it won't hurt them that bad just because it is a new car. So they will have a chance. They've got a decent driver in Ricky Stenhouse. Yeah, everybody makes fun of him, Ricky Stenhouse. But Ricky Stenhouse has a decent amount of talent. If he can stay consistent, he can work his way in there points-wise. He will contend for wins on super speedways and short tracks. But his intermediate game has something to be desired. He needs to improve on road courses like a lot of other drivers because road courses are more important now with 6 on the schedule. So I look for JTG Daugherty to pretty much sort of do the same thing that they always do, which is compete for a win every once in a while. But if Ricky Stenhouse can stay consistent, I think he can definitely be in the hunt for that, let's say, 13th to 16th spot and work his way into the playoffs. And overall for Chevrolet, I look for them to have a good season. I don't know if they're going to have another 19-win season, especially with Penske being with Ford. I think Penske, even though Chevrolet has a lot of supercar experience over in Australia, I think Penske has more direct experience with it because Penske won championships over in the supercar series. So I look for Chevrolet to have, it's hard to say it's going to be a down year when last year was 19 wins. I don't know if they'll get to 19 wins. I think they'll have a strong year, but I think they will be edged out just a little bit by Ford. And I hate saying that as a Kyle Larson and Chevrolet guy, but I think Ford, I just got to call it like I see it, guys, sorry. I think Ford is actually going to have a little bit of an edge to start the season, but by the end of the season, I think things will be totally different. So we will see what happens then. All right, now let's get to who I think will be your 16 drivers in the playoffs. All right, so here it is, my 16 picks for who I think will make it into the playoffs. Let's start off with the no-brainers. Kyle Larson, I think, will be in there. No problem. Chase Elliott, I think, will be in there. No problem. Joey Logano, I think, will be in there. Absolutely no problem. Ryan Blaney, I think, will be in there. Absolutely no problem. I think you can say those 4 guys legitimately. I think everybody universally will agree with those guys being in. After that, though, I think my list is going to get a little more sketchy to people. But before I get into it, let me tell you why it's going to get sketchy. I think with this new car, the bigger teams are still going to have an advantage, but that advantage is not going to be as big as it has been in the past. So if you miss the setup now, you no longer are still going to be riding around for 15th or 20th if you're a big team. You're going to be looking at 25th or worse because these other teams are going to be much closer to you. So when you have a bad day now, it's going to have a potential to be a really bad day because these smaller teams have a similar chassis and they're going to be right there up on you. So with that being said, here is the rest of the list. Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, William Byron, and Denny Hamlin. I still think that this is still, so far, pretty safe. But a lot of people will probably argue, why would you put William Byron that high? I think he showed improvement every single season. And if you look at, like, Joey Logano, when he sort of broke out, he came in there super young like William Byron did. When he finally broke out, it was around this time in his season. And I think also similarly, you can see somebody like William Byron break out right about this time this season. I think William Byron is going to show a lot this season coming up. 9 through 12, and here's where we're going to start getting into the argument phase of it, but I've got Reddick, Briscoe, Almirola, and Ross Chastain as my picks there. Now, I know a lot of people might not be high on Ross Chastain, but I think when he showed his improvement last season on the road courses, that's all I needed to see. This guy has improved every single race. Not every single season. This guy improves every single race, so I look for him to be really fast next season. Tyler Reddick is just right there on the cusp of breaking out. He is one win away from being one of the next big superstars in this sport, I think. And what had been holding him back was RCR equipment being slightly off. I don't want to say RCR equipment is bad equipment, but it was definitely slightly off compared to your Hendricks and Penskes of the world. So I think now with this competitive advantage gone, for the most part, I think he'll be up there contending for a lot more wins than he has been. Briscoe, he came on really strong at the end of last season along with SHR, so I look for him also to make some noise. And Aric Almirola, in his last season, he's going to give it all he's got, so I expect him to be in the playoffs because I don't see him missing them again. I think he could actually have 1 or 2 wins this season just because he is going to go all out for it and do the absolute best he can. You never count a guy out in his last season. And finally, rounding out my 16 are Alex Bowman, Kurt Busch, Erik Jones, and Austin Dillon. Now, I know a lot of people's heads are exploding right now, and I'm going to get to who I left off the list and why. But I think Austin Dillon has shown he's been super consistent, so if it comes to a points situation, I think he will be the last guy in. Erik Jones has proven when he's got decent equipment, he will just about always get you into the playoffs, very similar to Austin Dillon, except he gets you wins here and there. And I think with the full-time sponsorship, GMS proves in the Truck Series that they are a winning organization. I think they are going to boost that Petty performance up. So I look for them to have a lot better cars than they had last year. And last year, he wasn't super way off from making the playoffs anyway. But I think Erik Jones will get into the playoffs this year, and Alex Bowman, not a big stretch there, but he's so inconsistent, it's just hard to judge him. But I think he'll get a win, and he'll definitely be in. And Kurt Busch, who knows if this is his last season or not, and I think Toyota will be down. That's the only reason I've got Kurt Busch this low on the list. But we all know Kurt Busch always gets that 1 win a season, so that's why I have him there. Now, Brad Keselowski and Martin Truex, I left off this list. And here's why. I think Roush Fenway is going to get off to a slow start. I think that'll be a little bit much for Brad to overcome. I don't think those cars are capable of having winning speed just yet, and that was further emphasized in the clash at the Coliseum. Those cars just looked off for some reason. And so I think Roush Fenway, Keselowski is going to get off to a bad start, but I think by the end of the season they will have it figured out. But I think by then it will be too late to get him into the playoffs, so that's why I left him off the list. Martin Truex, I hate to leave off this list, but I think Toyota is going to be down. I debated on leaving him or Denny Hamlin off this list. I went with Hamlin on the list because Hamlin has been more consistent. Truex has just been streaky of late, recently. Since he won his title, actually, he's been more streaky than normal. But he could definitely be in, but he just doesn't look like he is in love. Like, this is just my opinion. He just doesn't look like he's in love with this new car, and when you're his age, 40-something years old, and you're not in love with something, it doesn't usually get any better. So I don't know. This might be his last season. I'm not sure. He just does not look like he is in love with this particular race car. So that is the reason I left him off this list. Austin Cindric, Justin Haley, and Harrison Burton, I left them off the list because rookies typically do not get into the playoffs. It's very rare for that to happen. That being said, I could see Austin Cindric sneaking a road course win in there. Harrison Burton is good at 1.5 miles, and if he's in Penske equipment, those 1.5 mile cars will be good. So I could see Harrison Burton sneaking in there and taking that last spot from Austin Dillon as well. And Justin Haley, that guy can absolutely wheel it. I could see him sneaking in and getting a win, but if it just turns into a points thing where the last guy in is a guy in on points, I think Austin Dillon has the edge there. But any of those 3 guys or any of these guys I just mentioned, I think can up and steal a win, especially Truex or Keselowski as well because they're veterans, but I just don't think Keselowski's car will be fast enough. And for whatever reason, I'm just getting a feeling that Martin Truex does not like this new car. All right, that is all I have got for you today. If you like the content, please feel free to subscribe down below. If you want to tell me how dumb I am in the comments, please be gentle. This is just for fun. I'm not trying to take a swipe at any of your drivers in particular. This is just, for fun. It's a preseason preview. I guess I'll go over it and see how wrong I was at the end of the year or something like that. I don't know. But If you got a comment, leave it in the comments, but please be gentle if you disagree with me. And other than that, thanks for your time. Peace.